Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting and the co founder of the Yogi AI. I am delighted to come back after a couple of months. It's been a while since I've been podcasting, but I'm very, very happy to have Peter Everett here from Astride Health here with me today to talk about something that I worked with him on over the last several months or so. So, before we go too far down the pike, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yogesh. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, and it's good to see you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Same here. So, Peter, I always start with this question with all my guests, which is give us a little bit of background about you and what was your trajectory from a career perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I guess you could say I started my career as a marketer in big CPG, right? So I worked at General Mills for about 25 years. And as frequently happens in those kinds of in a CPG type company, that started in marketing and then eventually transformed into general management, um, leading businesses across, I mean, pretty much every category that General Mills operates in,
Yeah.
and doing that in both the U.S. and Europe and China and Australia.
Hmm.
Um, so I did that for about 25 years. Had a great experience there, and just learned an enormous amount about brands and consumers and how to really lead a consumer first business. And then a few years ago, I left General Mills and with a few partners have we've created this business we call Astride Health, and it was really taking like part of what we are trying to do, and I think part of the reason, I'm sure we'll get into this today,
Yeah.
is we are trying to bring a consumer first lens to healthcare. um, where healthcare is very, in our opinion, in the U.S., healthcare is it's very reactive, and it's kind of driven by the system more than it's driven by the consumers themselves or the
Hmm.
patients. And we're trying to flip that model on its head, become much more proactive, and also create a business that's consumer first, so it really works for the people that want to use it,
Hmm.
rather than working for the nature of the industry.
Yes, that's great. So, tell us a little bit more. Like, you're you're in a senior role there at Astride Health. Um, what is the actual business model itself? If you don't mind, explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I start with what makes the Stride Health, most different. And I'd highlight three things. First of all, as I was saying, it's proactive, not reactive.
Hmm.
So in America, well, and in general, we tend to wait uh, to go to the doctor until we get sick. And when we do go to the doctor,
Hmm.
if they don't find anything's wrong with you, they say, okay, that's great. I'll see you in 12 months.
Hmm.
Our approach is let's get a very comprehensive view of the health of each individual. Let's set the priorities that are most important for them to maintain their health and improve their health, and
Hmm.
also to hold their health for decades to come.
Hmm.
So we build a very proactive model. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's just a ton of continuous human support built into our model. So
Hmm.
again, where typically you might see your doctor for 15 minutes once a year, in our model, typical member sees the MD um, once a quarter, and usually there's a few text messages in between, or some kind of connection in between.
Hmm.
And we also pair each member with an exercise physiologist who helps them with all the exercise and the strength and nutrition side of things.
Hmm.
There's a lot of human support built in through the model.
Hmm.
And then the last thing I would say is we're using a lot of diagnostics that are um, helping us get a comprehensive view of someone's health. So it's not just a single blood test with 15 parameters. We're trying to get enough information on someone's health that we get a very good comprehensive view
Hmm.
of where they're at. So those three things are probably what sets us apart from traditional healthcare.
So you started off by saying that this is more consumer focused. So clearly you have to think about
Mhm.
your target audience and who is your target audience, who will be attracted to your proposition, because um, you haven't said this yet. So I just want to kind of like, clarify. This is not necessarily within the health insurance that most people would potentially be having, right? Or is this a supplement on top of that? How does that work?
I mean, right now we're existing totally outside the insurance world.
Right.
And that's because insurance is geared toward that reactive model that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Our model is a membership model. So when a member joins, there's sort of an ongoing cash pay attached to that.
Yeah.
And then everything that we're doing, the diagnostics, the time with the MD, the time with the exercise physiologist,
Hmm.
everything else that supports that is
Hmm.
is part of that cash pay model.
Okay, fantastic. So then linking it to your your starting comment about this is more consumer focused.
Mhm.
Um, the company's been is a few years old. So what had you done already in terms of trying to understand your consumer, if anything at all?
um, well, I mean, as a startup, I mean, we had certainly done some things because we wanted to understand our consumer, obviously,
Yeah,
and we wanted to understand where we think growth can come from in the future and
yeah.
how best do we serve them.
Hmm.
But it's also a startup, so it was scrappy. So what we had done primarily was a lot of one-on-one interviews with our
Hmm.
current members to
Hmm.
try to understand for them motivations, what's working, what can we do better, that
Hmm.
sort of thing. We'd also done some prototyping. So as we've done prototyping, we share those prototypes with some of our members, but also people who are not members,
Yeah.
to get a lens of like, okay, this prototype of a member portal, for example,
Hmm.
does it respond to what they need? Does it work? Does it motivate them? Does it give them the information they're looking for? That kind of thing. But that was like very narrow within the lens of a prototype development process.
Right.
We hadn't done What we hadn't done is we hadn't taken a step back and
Hmm.
said, hey, okay, let's look at the total universe and let's try to understand who would be interested in this product. I mean, again, as a startup, it's based on a lot of gut feel, and I think our team's gut feel is pretty good, but we hadn't taken a step back and said, hey, let's look at the broader landscape and try to understand what the different types of consumers are who are going to be most attracted to this approach,
Yeah.
and then how do we talk to them, where do we find them, that kind of thing. So we
Yeah.
needed to take a step back.
So that led you to have a conversation with Marilyn Weiss from Sivo Insights, right? Tell us, what was that first conversation like between Marilyn and you on this particular question?
Well, every conversation with Marilyn is very high energy, so it was obviously a high energy conversation. So that was fun. But then what was interesting, it was more a discussion around, hey, here's where the business is at, here are the big questions that we're thinking about
Hmm.
and frankly don't have answers to right now,
Hmm.
and just kind of, what do you think, like, how would you approach this? I mean, one thing that's great about Sivo is Sivo is working with bigger companies, smaller companies, and seeing kind of a broad range of CPG, but also different industries.
Hmm.
And so it makes it a very interesting sounding board, if you like. And so we had that sort of a conversation around what are the big questions we have as a company, and then it got into like, okay, how might you answer that question?
Hmm.
But it didn't start with that. It started with like, what are the big strategic questions that we're having as a startup.
Amazing. So, and she basically brought up this thing about this guy called Yogesh and some crazy stuff he's doing. So, what was that part of the
Sounded pretty
conversation?
cool. Um, yeah, I mean, um, so I mean, first of all, it was strategically, it was responding to what we needed, right? Like we needed that step back, and we needed to take a bigger view of
Hmm.
not just the people that we had managed to be in one-on-one touch with,
Yeah.
but like, what is the bigger market um, all about, and where's the opportunity,
Hmm.
and who can we serve? Um, so that was interesting. The other thing was, then she was also saying, hey, this is for in our world as a startup, this is a methodology that fits
Hmm.
better than doing what I was used to. Like having come from General Mills and worked on big brands and everything.
Hmm.
When you do a segmentation study, it's usually a giant process.
Yeah.
It takes a really long time.
Hmm.
The output is good, but it's a pretty rigid process, if I'm honest. And once you get started with the process, you can't really change it because you're kind of working down a path. Um, and what was most interesting for me about what she was telling me was, hey, this is an approach that kind of works for a startup world, you know. And I think it can, now knowing what I know about it,
Yeah.
I think it also works in a CPG world or a big company world.
Yeah.
But it was a really good fit for how we needed to operate.
Right. So, so that led you to me. Marilyn introduced the two of us, and we were talking about segmentation as a potential way to help you determine
Mm-hmm.
your growth targets. And there was one thing that you told me at that time that Yogesh, we're still building out, you're in the Minneapolis St. Paul area,
Mhm.
and I distinctly remember you asking me, do you think we could do this in the context of the Twin Cities? And if I remember correctly, my response was, I don't know, but let's try it. And what was your reaction when I said that to you, if you remember that part of the conversation?
I mean, I'm living in a startup world, so sometimes you adapt, right? And that was very much kind of an adapt to a unique constraint,
Yeah,
but appreciative too, right? Because it's important for us. We
yeah,
do operate, and we do have members that are around the country, but our home base is Minneapolis, St. Paul, um, and about 2/3 of our members are in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So as we were thinking about prioritization, like understanding a small area was actually more important for us than understanding, what's available in New York, or, how a consumer in New York thinks about this, or a consumer in San Francisco. And that's part of what's kind of unique about our world as well in this piece of healthcare that we're working in.
yeah,
Um, there are some places that are doing things similar to us in New York City, in Austin, in San
mhm,
Francisco, but there's not really anything in the upper Midwest.
mhm,
And so if we came back with a result that was really relevant for San Francisco, that actually would have been a bad lead for us, right? It would have
yeah,
actually probably taken us down a little bit of the wrong path,
yeah,
um, because I mean that's not where we're at, right? That's not our consumer, and I think there's a pretty big difference between the consumers in Northern California that are using a service like this versus the consumer in Minneapolis, Chicago, et cetera, that are using a service like this.
makes sense, makes sense. So, let's get into the mechanics a little bit about, the process that we went through together.
Mhm.
There are two levels that I want to kind of like, touch upon from your perspective. You are the client in this case, and you're hearing, this guy Yogesh talk about building a segmentation model using AI, and
Mhm.
using the large language model to build it out. Um, what was your first reaction when I told you all that? Was it believable? Was it interesting? Can it actually be done? How do I even know if it's going to be true or not? I'm assuming that these are some of the
Yeah, yeah.
potential doubts you're having. So just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I was thinking about was accuracy. Like how
Okay.
accurate is this going to be? Because again, coming from my background, I'm coming from a CPG background where, I don't know, we might spend $100,000 on a study like this, or maybe $200,000 on a study like this that would have built in, big groups of consumers, like large numbers of consumers.
Yep.
Like I said, it's a pretty rigid process, but it was a really well defined process.
Hmm.
And you mostly trust the accuracy of that result at the end of that
Hmm.
process.
Yeah.
Here, I think the thing that I always think about with LLMs, and we tell our members this too in the context of healthcare, is the worry I have with AI is usually reflecting the general wisdom of the internet back to you,
Hmm.
right? Like if I ask AI a question, AI is going to tell me kind of the average of what it found on the internet,
Hmm.
which in the healthcare space is not always a good thing. Like
Hmm.
I would not get my healthcare advice from Instagram,
Yeah.
or influencers on the internet writing blogs or whatever. Um, and so like part of the question there for me was also like, is this going to be accurate? Is this going to be something that drives our business in the right direction? Because we don't want to be going in the wrong direction on this thing.
Of course, of course. So, yeah, and these are major questions, right?
Mhm.
Accuracy, validity, reliability, specificity. These are the things that are there. Was there anything that when I shared with you from a process perspective at that in the early stages of this, that made you say, okay, this could work, or was there still like a bit of a hesitancy? I'm trying to just like flush out and see, what was the skepticism that you had?
Yeah,
Because I see this with all my clients at the end of the day, right? So I just want to kind of like
yeah,
articulate it and say that this is what you experience is pretty common, basically.
yeah,
So
yeah. Um, well, I mean, like I said, the accuracy is one element of it.
mm,
The other element of it for me, it's less about, like, I've done enormous amounts of market research projects as a marketer, I partnered with a lot of market research teams
Yeah.
over the years to do different types of projects. So like I understand how the projects are led,
Hmm.
um, but I also know one of the biggest, um, what's the right way to say this? One of the biggest concerns with doing a big research project is that like half of these research projects end up as a PowerPoint deck that gets thrown into a drawer somewhere,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't get used.
Yeah.
Um, and everyone goes to the meeting, there's a big report out, everyone goes to the meeting for an hour and says, wow, that's really interesting. And then it doesn't have an impact on the business.
Yeah.
Um, or at a minimum, it doesn't have the impact that it should, that it could.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of put that in our startup lens. The issue that, the other concern I guess I had with going in was, is this going to be a lot of work that leads to a nice presentation, but it takes a lot of time and effort on the part of everyone who's involved, and doesn't change the direction that we take as a business.
Hmm.
It doesn't have the impact that we want to have. So at the end of the day, is it going to have the impact that we need it to have for the business to help us steer the business in the right direction?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, that would be the other big question that I had, um, going in, is, is it going to help us have that impact?
Yeah. So I'm going to like circumvent a bit, and I'm going to come back to the process part in a
Yeah.
second. But after having gone through the entire process,
Hmm.
were you, where did you land in terms of the output that you got? And I'll come and we'll go back through the process part in a second. Since you brought up those,
Yeah. When you say land in terms of the output, you mean, like the actual output, or you mean the impact that it had on our decision making,
uh,
or?
let's start with the output itself, and then how did it impact your decision making? Let's just like get that out of the way first.
Yeah. Um, Well, okay, so super tangibly. So we, did this segmentation work, came back with, a market segmentation of 5 segments overall, of which 2 were kind of obvious deprioritized groups. And then there were 3 groups that were, worth a discussion, and definitely worth a discussion of like digging in deeper of should any of these be our targets, and um, and targets that we could see, right? Like what was really interesting, I'm going to go off a little bit here, but when we went through the results for the first time with the entire team,
Hmm.
um, in the room, half the team are scientists. They're not anybody with marketing backgrounds for sure, and they haven't done market research projects before, so this is all new to them. But as we were going through it and we were thinking about those 3 segments in particular, I remember our exercise physiologist saying like, "Hey, that sounds like so and so.
Yeah.
Like that sounds like this person in our membership base, who has that particular concern."
Mhm.
Or you'd see a quote, and one of our MDs would say, "Hey, that sounds like, member X, let's call him." And so you could feel it, like, and everyone across the team was able to kind of feel it, like, "Hey, this represents little snippets of people that we're seeing today, or concerns that we're hearing from our members today." So that was super interesting. Um, so anyway, we came down to like 3 segments overall, that are interesting and worth debate. We had a facilitated debate or discussion as a team around like the pros and cons of those 3 different segments.
Mhm.
Um, and what was a little bit surprising is, we pretty quickly were able to zero in on one particular segment,
Mhm.
um, that um, that we wanted to prioritize as a business. And it wasn't because all of our members today fit into that one segment. Actually, that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
But it was more like thinking about this one particular segment. The fit was obviously very good. The need space was a good need space, in terms of the need of the potential member. It was a really strong fit for what we were offering.
Mhm.
And based on people that we had talked to recently, we could also point to some personal experience and say, hey, those kinds of people are responding really well to what we're talking about here, what we're working on. And so anyway, we left that first meeting with like, or that big meeting with a prioritization of, this is the group we want to go after, and now we got to like reorganize some of our communication, even some of our member service process, to really help fit against that prioritized segment.
So there's some things you said just now, so I'm going to kind of like now go back to the beginning part of the conversation, which is you were worried about accuracy, but the way you just described the outcome, it feels like it was, it seemed it was accurate because you could actually, determine specific members that would fit into the different profiles,
Yeah,
right? Um, and there was sufficient degree of specificity. I deliberately use the word sufficient that gave you did that give you confidence in terms of, yeah, this is a robust, valid segment that we can potentially go after,
yeah,
or what was it that made you feel confident that this was actually
yeah,
a robust segmentation?
yeah. I mean, part of it was that intuitively it held together, right? And then being able to kind of point. Um, it's hard without actually like showing the final result to
Yeah,
the audience. But like in my mind, I've got some of these slides where they have where we've got like language that our members would use or
yeah,
that the segments would use, and it matches the language that we're hearing today from some of our members, right? Like, and but then what was powerful about it was it then also took it a step farther to help us decode what are the motivations
hmm,
behind why they're saying that.
hmm,
Um, and um, uh, and that's super powerful. Like we can get into a couple examples of that if it's helpful, but
yeah,
um, it helped us to decode like, hey, when so and so tells me, um, gosh, I don't know, think of an example. When a member tells me that they really appreciated this discussion around their VO2 max diagnostics,
hmm,
like why does that matter to them, and what's their motivation? Like, what are they worried about
hmm,
actually? Because
hmm,
this healthcare business, it's similar to the CPG world in the sense that consumers are good at telling you if they like something or if they don't like something,
yeah,
but it's not always easy for them to articulate why.
hmm,
And getting to those underlying motivations
yeah,
is always critical, right? That then unlocks how should we how should we shape the service itself, but then how should we talk to people about it? How should we communicate it? Where should future members come from? So yeah, anyway, so that like that intuitive piece was really important. And the other thing, I'd go back to something you said earlier around the geography,
hmm,
um, the the ability to like zero in on the Minneapolis St. Paul geography. Like for us, that was super relevant. I'm sure for other businesses, they have other things they want to zero in on.
yeah,
But there was so much specificity around the Minneapolis St. Paul geography that you know fit what we knew about the competitive environment, fit what we knew about kind of the broader healthcare environment. That it was, I mean, it was obviously real. Like the
yeah.
results were clear and they were real.
So there's actually a question that's coming through. I'm going to see if I can put it on the screen here. Um, as- um, Franklin's asking, did the output answer the original question of the study? It seems rhetorical, but the study successful in reaching its goal, or this would give confidence in the targeted segment, basically. So in essence, he's asking, based on what you were originally asking, did the
Mhm.
segmentation that I created for you, did it meet your objective, basically?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, because very simply, excuse me, very simply, what we wanted to know was who should we prioritize?
Hmm.
Um, because we can get into all the whys of that, but we wanted to know who should we prioritize to talk
Yeah.
to. Um, and in the end, we left with, okay, here's the total landscape. And
Hmm.
then within that, we prioritized one particular segment
Hmm.
that this is the segment we want to talk to the most.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that our communication fits them and also our product, our service fits them,
Yeah.
because we feel like that's where there was the clearest opportunity.
Right. So I want to spend a couple of minutes now talking about the methodology itself, because we talked about the front end in terms of the scope of the project.
Hmm.
We wanted to do something for Minneapolis, St. Paul. We knew it was in the healthcare space for people who are not just being reactive, but what is the market landscape? So that was kind of like one part of it, and then who should we target? And
Hmm.
then in the back end, we just talked about how you were, your confidence grew when you saw the output and you could actually connect specific members to different segments, and you were like, yep, I can actually prioritize and say this is the segment I can go after, right?
Right.
but in between the front end and the back end, there were two things that had to still happen. One was the actual development of the segmentation itself, and the second part was the deployment of the segmentation and the and the alignment that happened internally with you and your team, right? So let me first now talk about the development part of it, because behind the scenes, after you and I had spoken with Marilyn and the CVO team, um, I had to go through a process where I didn't have any consumer data to speak of. You didn't give me any transcripts of any conversations that you had with your members. Um, there was nothing really. So I was
Mhm.
relying literally on the LLM to extract information in the context of this category and in the context of the Minneapolis St. Paul area. And this is where, there are raging debates happening, you know, um, in the market research world around, how AI kind of like pushes everything to the mean and you can't really see things or whatever. I I hear all those conversations, but I think and there's truth to it. Don't get me wrong. There is some truth to it, but there are ways to actually create that differentiation, and it requires an understanding of exactly how to go about doing it, right? So, and that's the agentic workflows that I've built to be able to create the segmentation in the first place,
Mhm.
right? So the data and the information that I was getting was from the LLM, and I went through a rigorous process of actually extracting that kind of information that would be in context of, the scope that we were talking about. And then the second part of it is to transform that information, which is practically text-based. It's not data-based. It's not like hard numbers, right?
Mhm.
There are no attributes. There are no, you know, satisfaction, dissatisfaction questions.
Right, right,
None of
right,
that,
right.
right? But I was still able to take the information that was available from the LLM, and using my agentic system, I was able to translate that into a five-segment solution. And
Mhm.
just for the record, when my system did that, I've got 30 years of work experience doing this kind of stuff. I've done several dozen segmentations in my career. I know when something looks right or something doesn't look right, and the first output isn't the final output. I go through iterations of my own to stress test it before um, I present anything to
Right,
that I presented to you, right?
right.
So that internal workflow process for me, I hold myself to a standard which is it has to be specific. It has to be um, differentiated across the segments so that we minimize the overlap between the segments. I think you saw that in your case as well.
Yeah.
And um, you have to be able to find those people eventually, right? Otherwise, what's the point?
Mhm.
So, everything else we do in the traditional, segmentation process, you mentioned it yourself. It's like it's a long process. You have hundreds of attributes that you're going and surveying consumers with. I do none of that, right?
Yeah,
Because as important as it is, the problem is that the moment you run that survey, then you're stuck. That's
totally.
it. Unless you
Yeah,
want to go spend another $100,000 or whatever to rerun
right.
the
Yeah,
survey,
right,
we're not stuck. We're dynamic. So if there was new information coming in, if you came to me 6 months from now and said, Yogesh, the market has changed this way, how would the segments look? I can do it very easily because I have a dynamic system that I've built out basically,
right,
right?
right. Well,
So
and building on that, like it, I mean, this well. I'll kind of tell the audience to share this story. Um, part of where that became really useful was, we got through a first iteration, or at least it was the first iteration that I had seen. Probably you had several iterations before that.
yeah,
Um, and we said, hey, this is great. This is, all the reasons like this information is really interesting and useful, but we need to know more about the life stage. And
yes,
I remember the comment I made to you was like, hey,
yeah,
like when we're talking to people, either members or prospective members, it's clear that the life stage is having a bigger impact on it than we sort of anticipated.
yeah,
Meaning, have I just retired? Am I thinking about retirement?
mhm,
What stage of my career am I in? Have my kids left the home yet? Things like that.
yeah,
And we, I guess in the old segmentation world, what you'd have to do is like just what you just said. You'd have to go all the way back to the beginning and reinsert a bunch of questions and then start the process over again.
yeah,
The difference here was we said, hey, we want to zero in more on this life stage aspect because it seems like it's quite critical.
Mm-hmm.
and you're then able to kind of rerun the thing with um, with that different lens on it,
Mm-hmm.
and that lens became quite useful as we got deeper into the process. Which again, there's an agility there that you wouldn't be able to have in a traditional methodology. For us, that was one of the really um, critical benefits of it.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly the reason why I was saying it earlier. Because um, having done it, the old-fashioned way for so many years, my single biggest frustration was that, once you've got a segmentation view,
Yeah.
you know, 9 months, 6 months, 9 months after you started the process, you're kind of stuck with that view
Hmm.
for the next
Hmm.
few years.
Totally.
And um, people's life stages, change, their circumstances change, and the traditional segmentation systems don't account for that,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you then make it dynamic, basically? Was always the thing that was in my head.
Totally. Totally. And another way, I mean, I'm just kind of riffing now, but another way that this would make this methodology quite powerful, I think, if you're working in a global business environment like I used to do,
Hmm.
um, is like, when we would do a segmentation, we would typically have to like pick one market or two markets to do a segmentation. And
Yeah.
even then it was really hard to justify, the scale of a single market versus the cost of a segmentation study,
Hmm.
all that. Um, with the way this thing is structured, I would imagine it's a lot easier to like take into account differences between individual markets
Hmm.
and provide a sort of a multi-market view, which if you're working internationally, that's super helpful. Or even if you're just working in the US and you want to understand, what's the difference between LA and Chicago, or,
Hmm.
California and, the upper Midwest,
Hmm.
it allows you to kind of drill down and get that specificity it's hard to get, because like a traditional segmentation is so much about the end, right? It's so much about how many people can you get on the input side.
Yeah.
Um, this is a lot more, I think, and for me, my personal opinion, this approach is just way more flexible that way.
You're right, but there are some limits, though. Let me just be very, clear about that, because you're dependent on how much information is available through the LLM. And this, in your scenario, we were exclusively using the LLM, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've had other clients where, they permitted me to use some of their prior information, whether it's an older segmentation that they want to have it refreshed,
Mm-hmm.
or they've got, transcripts from, qualitative research or brand equity data or whatever it is. Some clients permit me to use that in the context of my agents, basically. But outside of that, if you're just relying on the LLM side of it, I always check whether that category, whether it's a product category or a service category, has sufficient information available to allow us to have a high degree of confidence in terms of how we are building out the segmentation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are categories, for example, where I've had conversations with clients on, or prospective clients on, where when I did my first scan, the information may, in the healthcare case in particular, the information was very skewed to medical journals and medical information
Oh, right.
from a doctor's perspective,
Right.
not from a consumer perspective. So in that scenario, if I wanted to do something in that case, I would have had to kind of like, figure out a pathway to balance that information where there's a lack
Right.
of information versus the higher level of information.
Interesting.
Um, there are cases also where, you know, um, consumers may be engaged in the category, but they're not talking about it publicly, or there's
Yeah.
no information out about it publicly, right? So these are all the checks I was doing internally
Mm.
to make sure that I'm able to have a higher degree of confidence in terms of what I'm building out, because if the data is skewed, then everything's going to be skewed.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Right?
And it leads you down the wrong path. But then how do you like, talk me through that a little more. How do you set that threshold? How do you know that you've got the right kind of data or the right breadth of data?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the diversity of data. So what I do is I don't use one LLM. I actually use three different LLMs to extract the information, and
Mhm.
I'm comparing to see two things. One, how consistent is the data across the three LLMs? Um, Roughly 60% of the information is going to be consistent, um, but the remaining 40%, and I'm exaggerating a bit, but let's say it's 30 to 40%.
Yeah.
There's divergence. And it's not because they're extracting information from different data sources only. It's also how the LLM's algorithms are built in terms of how they're analyzing my prompt, also,
Mm.
right? Philosophically, Gemini versus Claude versus ChatGPT, they are built differently. They're different algorithms at the end of the day,
Right.
right? So that also helps me get a sense of how much diversity that's there. So when I take all that information and I create the dimensions for the category, I come back usually to the client and I ask them to review the dimensions to make sure that if there's something that I've missed or that the data that I've collected is missing, the client knows best their business. They know their industry far better than I ever will.
Hmm.
It's their opportunity to come in and say, "Hey, Yogesh, have you considered that? Have you considered, this dimension or that dimension?" And in
Right.
some cases, it completely, may make sense. I actually had a situation yesterday with a client where, you know, I shared the dimensions and I had missed one very critical dimension. Then they pointed out to me, saying, "Yogesh, you missed this." And I reran it through my system, and they were like, "Yep, you're absolutely right that I missed this."
Mm.
So I built that into the dimensions that
Interesting.
were relevant for that particular segmentation,
Yeah.
right? So that human in the loop part of it is my way of double checking whether I've got everything or I don't have everything as well. If that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. No. I mean, that makes perfect sense. You can't just like put a prompt into Claude and have it spit this thing out. You gotta check the outputs and work with the outputs, and I love that collaboration too. I mean, that was consistent with how you were working with our team too, right? Was that kind of level
Yeah,
of collaboration and back and forth to work it to get to a point where we felt really confident with the output.
exactly. So people talk, and actually the funny part of it is that 9 times out of 10, the inputs coming in are highly relevant. But there is that one out of 10 instance where some clients, they're also in their business and there's a bit of a tunnel vision. So
Hmm.
they kind of like narrowed things down
Yeah.
when the marketplace is actually telling them something different,
Hmm.
right? So I'm also checking for that too from a human in the loop perspective as to whether
Yeah.
we're skewing stuff because we are so immersed in their business that they
Yeah.
may be missing something, and I'm telling them something that's actually different, and there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So the way I try to resolve it is, obviously we talk it through, but if we still can't resolve it, that's where I say let's go do some primary research, pinpointed research, to go answer that one question versus going and doing the full rigmarole of the full segmentation or whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
that kind of like helps also bring enrollment and confidence in the output that you eventually get at the
Yeah.
end of the day. You know?
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I mean, that approach makes total sense. What you're saying. I think our team's experience was uh, similar but different. Similar in the sense of like, we all had our ideas internally of like what our segment might be, right, or
Yeah.
what our priority
Hmm.
audience might be. Um, but the challenge that we had was, um, today on the business we've got about 80 members. Every member's different. Every member has its own,
Yeah.
has their own concerns or questions or history.
Yeah.
What they're working toward, what's most important to them, and you start to see, if we just take like all 80 of those people as 80 individual data points and
Yeah.
we talk about them as a group, we
Hmm.
get lost in the how it all fits together, right? And it becomes just sort of like either it becomes like a generic, like, hey, this is what everybody wants,
Yeah.
or it becomes, maybe there's like a recency bias where it's like the most recent member I talked to that said something really interesting, and now that's the only thing I care about,
Yeah.
and in our world, that's a real risk as a startup, right? Because you're operating so much on gut, and gut's important, and I think our gut is good, but
Hmm.
it can lead you to some funny biases. What was interesting in those three segments that we were talking about
Yeah.
is, it did take a step back, and there was a clear distinction between the three segments of, um, like, it was three very different and very clear buckets.
Yeah.
And that allowed us to have a discussion that we couldn't have otherwise.
Hmm.
Because if we're all thinking about all 80 of our members simultaneously, it gets to be kind of just a jumbled
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
Whereas if we've got three different segments, it's like, okay, now I can see the three options very clearly and I can understand their motivations because we've been able to articulate those motivations
Yeah.
in a way we hadn't done before. And then suddenly it's like, wow, it's actually very easy to choose where our priority should lay
Mhm.
because the distinction was quite clear.
There's another question that came through. I want to just put it on the screen. Were your accuracy concerns only answered once you saw the output? And did it make sense? Or was there something earlier in the process that satisfied your accuracy concerns? Because what you just described in terms of the three and the conversations that you had, um, you still had to have confidence that those were the right three in the first place, right?
Yeah. I, like, this is a good question. Was there something earlier in the process inputs? I mean, there were data points along the way that made me feel more confident. I guess it was growing confidence as we went through it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there were data points as we went through it. So obviously, I mean, I was kind of the main partner with like Yogesh and the rest of the SIVO team in terms of like looking at the outputs and working on what they meant. So I saw it, several steps along the process. Um, I, I, my confidence was growing as I saw like what the outputs looked like, and I could get a sense of like stress testing the outputs. And
Yeah.
I don't think I told you this, Yogesh, but I was stress testing them kind of on the side too. And it was and it all checked out.
Yeah.
Um, but it
Okay.
was, yeah, like I said, for me the key was when we got into the room as a team of like non-marketers, non-research specialists, and a team of like half science oriented individuals,
Yeah.
and we're able to say, yeah, this makes, like, I can see that behavior in some of these members, or I can I can see the quotes
Mhm.
in conversations that I've had with different people recently. That
Mhm.
to me was like that was the real proof point, um, that it all checked out. And to be honest, like, there wasn't anything that felt off. Like, by the time we got to the end process, there wasn't anything that felt like it was, like, hey, well, I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
It was more helping us make sense out of like lots of different data points. And yeah, so I guess our sense of confidence grew as we went through all the way to the end of the project.
Amazing. There's another question that I don't know if I did this for you or not, but was the sizing of the segments a follow-on process once you had the initial segmentation definitions, or were you somehow able to size them through the initial LLM work? Let me take answer that part of it.
Sure.
The So Tim, the answer to your question is that the LLMs don't have actually they may or may not have data, right? So even though we're organizing it in a particular way using the segmentation agents that I built, um, uh, sizing them is still a challenge because goes back to what Peter was saying earlier in terms of there may be a high volume of conversation happening on one particular topic area that may be overwhelming or underwhelming, other parts of the segments. So I don't rely on the output from the LLM to give me the sizes. I give ranges. But what I do is I do a follow-up survey based on the typing tool we create to go and size the segments. And that way we are marrying the consumer research with the LLM outputs as a way to kind of like give an integrated point of view. Um, Unlike, running a huge survey that's 30 minutes long or 45 minutes long for a segmentation study, running a few questions, can take 5 to 7 minutes. It doesn't cost as much. You can get through that, in a couple of days, and you can actually have the answers built in basically. So that's how I've kind of like tried to mitigate the sizing part of the question, basically.
Yeah, it's a very good question. That Moynihan character, he's clearly a sharp dude.
Yeah, yeah. So that from a mechanics perspective, I've got a process that's been built in where, starting from the definition of the category, how we get to the dimensions, how do we get to the segments itself, and then how do we size them. These are steps in the process that we've created. And the big learning that I've had this year, quite frankly speaking, is that doing it the traditional way, all the MR people on the call or listening in to this podcast, we've all done it the same way for the last 25, 30 years, right? What's the innovation in that? There's none really to speak of, right? So even if you apply AI from a, I can go generate the survey through AI, I can do the analysis through, the clustering analysis through AI. All you're doing is automating elements of the process. I'm not doing any of that. I'm kind of coming in and saying, is there a different pathway that gets me to the same end result? And the way I've designed the system, the short answer is yes, you can. Because here's an example from Peter with Astride Health where we did that. And
Mhm.
you're hearing him talk about what he's experienced basically. So, and by the way, I've got 9 other cases now this year alone, which I can point to and say, yep, it worked.
Nice.
Yeah.
But you would say the Astride Health team was probably the best team you worked with, right?
Of course, no doubt. Everybody else is going to call me, of course, and complain about that point. But
Right.
you
Exactly.
know, every team is amazing, and you guys were absolutely phenomenal from that perspective.
Well,
I
and let me talk on the sizing question when we're like build too,
yeah,
because I mean what you explained, Yogesh, about how you do the sizing as
yeah,
a second step, that makes perfect sense. For us, like what we were looking for in our piece was especially, it was kind of less sizing, it was especially product market fit, right? Because like I mean, as a startup, we're looking for where are we going to get the best growth and the most strategic growth. We're not necessarily, we're not trying to boil the ocean in terms of addressing all Americans right now.
yeah,
And that was, so that was part of the strength. I mean, I'm sure we could have gone to sizing if that was an important piece for us, but
yeah.
at this stage it was more, hey, let's find the right fit with the service of the service we're offering today, and
Mm.
figure out how to be successful with those people.
Amazing, amazing. So, there was another component that John Overly unfortunately couldn't join today. But I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about, his role in the process as
Mhm.
well.
Sure.
John was supporting, Sivo as well in terms of um, helping you, I think, get your team enrolled to the segmentation as well. So, do you want to just speak a little bit about what he did for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I've known John for a number of years, and worked with him on previous projects, and um, in the context of like strategic, usually innovation projects at General Mills.
Mhm.
And Going back to a comment I made earlier, one of our biggest fears was like, hey, we do all this work, it looks really good, it's really compelling, and then it gets shoved in a drawer.
Yeah.
And particularly for our team at Astride, we're a small team. It's not a big team, and it's a very diverse team. Meaning, I mean, it's diverse in a lot of ways, but the background of our team is very diverse. Um, you know, MDs, PhDs, mixed with some commercial people, and a Silicon Valley guy, and so it's a very unique background of a group,
Mhm.
and we needed to make sure that we had a good discussion, and that everyone was able to make sense of what the output of this thing was, of what the
Mhm.
segmentation was, and then that we're able to make clear decisions based on it that will drive the business. And so what John helped us with was basically working through that as a team. How do we make sure we have a good discussion, and a discussion that allows us all to kind of roll around in the results a little bit,
Yeah.
and then facilitate a discussion that leads us to a decision, so that we set a clear direction, and it helps us figure out how we need to change moving forward.
Right. So, and that's also a skill set in terms of getting people to A, internalize the information, and B, um, translate it in from their vantage point, what to do
Mhm.
with the information as well. Because ultimately, if you don't want it to be stuck in a drawer, people have to say, yeah, this is something that can help me do my job more effectively.
Right.
And I think that was the part that I thought he was helping you translate as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And the proof point was seeing around the table, having, like I said, one of our MDs like say like, oh yeah, I've heard this comment from a member, and like by the time we got to the end of the discussion, our MD was like proposing new, taglines for the business. Like he was so deep into like, hey, this is helping us set a direction of where we need to go. That like, hey, so he's like, one of our taglines should be, your next project is you. And anyway, you kind of have to know the segmentation to know why that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a great tagline. We actually use it on some of our communication. Um, so to be able to get an entrepreneurial team, but a team with really diverse backgrounds, to get to that point where they're actually brainstorming. I didn't
Yeah.
think we were going to get that far, but we made a lot of progress.
That's amazing. I did not know that part of it actually, Peter. So thank you for sharing that. So if you are, shameless plug now from my end, if you were to talk to potential, to your peer group, right?
Mhm.
Others, C-suite level people, who are either CMO or chief growth officers, etc. Um, what would you say to them to say, hey, consider this as an option in your toolkit versus what you've been doing, versus the traditional way of how you've been doing things? What would you say to them?
Um, uh, I mean, gosh, I guess I'd go back to like what's the benefit that we got out of it?
Yeah.
We were able to do. I mean, I think we put a lot of constraints on you or a lot of challenges on you,
Yeah.
and we're in a we're in a segment or a niche of the healthcare industry that's super undeveloped, and it's still we're basically trying to like buck the trend of standard healthcare. Um, so that's a challenge, right? Because there's not a ton of data, there's not a ton of information about it, and even our consumers, like frankly, when we talk to our members and our consumers,
Yeah.
potential members, it's hard for them to articulate what
Mhm.
we're all about. Um, Simply because it's so different than what they're used to, and they know intuitively that they're looking for this, but they've never heard anybody make a pitch about it before, so they've never seen it.
Yeah.
We're putting some big constraints around. Okay, this is a niche where there's not a huge amount of information.
Hmm.
We wanted to put some particular constraints around it in terms of geography, and then we also um, added some questions midway through the process.
Yeah.
Um, and the methodology was flexible enough to be able to answer all those things
Hmm.
really well
Yeah.
and give us clear direction. And I'm sure for the market research like professionals, like the folks who can go really deep on the precision elements of the methodology, you can talk about like how to know the information is accurate, how to know the output is accurate.
Hmm.
I'm less steeped in that depth of it.
Yeah.
But what's most important for me is like, does this have an impact that helps us change the direction of the business?
Yeah.
And it definitely did, and it did, and like I said, it did that with a pretty diverse team that wasn't all steeped in market research outputs in their previous careers. So it had an impact on our business, and it was able to adapt to some pretty unique constraints that we wanted to put around it to get
Hmm.
answers to the questions that we had.
Yeah.
And that was just that was super helpful for us, and that's at the end of the day, the most important question is, did it get thrown in the drawer or did it get used? And
Yeah.
it definitely has been used, and it's definitely changed some of the decisions and how we think about our future member base, which is that's what you're looking for, right? That's all you can ask for.
Knowing what you know now, if there was something else that you would have wished for in that project, is there anything that you would have, asked for that's more than what we've provided you so far?
Hmm. You mean like an additional constraint we would have thrown at you at the beginning?
Yeah, just to make your life more miserable.
um, I you know uh, I don't I don't think so. But let me give you two ideas or two thoughts.
Mhm.
Like one element that we've asked ourselves, and we've actually used the output of this segmentation to help us judge, is
Mhm.
like, how does what we do compare to the competitive options that are in the market?
Mhm.
And then how do we make sure that we stay distinct versus those competitive options that are in the market?
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it is, and I would encourage anyone who goes through this. I mean, I think it's probably fairly straightforward to use this as a check in the future on how are you doing versus your competitors,
Yeah.
in terms of staying distinct, staying differentiated. So that's one thing, and we have used it for some of that since then. I had another thought. What was my other thought? Um, Gosh, I'm not sure. I had another thought, but I've lost it. So maybe it'll
No
come back
worries.
to me before we wrap up. But
No worries. No worries.
but the competitive aspect was interesting. Um, I have a question for you actually, as we think about this and how we would use it, because
Yeah.
as we move forward, one of the biggest things this has impacted for us is how we communicate um, to potential members, both where we communicate, kind of the
Mhm.
channels that we're using,
Yep.
and also the content itself, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever the content is. Um, and we're doing things like events. We're doing one-on-one conversations with people. We're not doing like a big TV ad campaign.
Hmm.
But could you use the segmentation or the outputs of segmentation to help evaluate the effectiveness of that communication moving forward? And how would you guide somebody on that?
The evaluation part is very doable. Um, there are a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it with actual consumers. You have the segments, you can profile them, and you can recruit consumers, and
Mm-hmm.
then have them react to your stimulus materials, etc. The other way is using synthetic respondents. That's becoming a new arrow in the toolkit, if you can call it that. Where you create a persona of your segment, and then you basically have that persona react to your stimulus and against specific questions, and you can
Mm-hmm.
actually test it to see what happens.
Awesome.
I've actually done that for a number of clients, where I screened, brand repositioning statements. I've screened brand concepts and so on and so forth.
Mm.
And in one specific use case that I've I've gone public with, Semaine Health is the brand. It's a women's vitamins brand. The
Mm.
CMO, Joan Carter, she was on a podcast like this with me, where she talked about how she had worked the screening and the testing part of it from a synthetic data perspective.
Mm.
She tested like 10 to 15 ideas, in a quant synthetic test and then in a qual synthetic test. We narrowed it down to the top three. She ran a actual survey monkey study to verify what I was coming back with.
Right.
We had an 85% correlation on the results.
Nice.
She chose the one of the top three ideas. Wasn't her first choice, but she chose it based on what we had come up with.
Okay.
Went to market with it, and she actually saw growth behind that idea. And that's why she felt so much more confident that the process that we went through in screening ideas using synthetic data, you could actually get valid results that were actually proving out in the marketplace.
Mm.
Um, I can tell you, and at least based on my conference, exposure, I go to most of the conferences. Everyone talks about benchmarking versus the traditional, market research approach. I've yet to see enough cases or any cases outside of what I've shared where people are saying, we made this decision, we went to market, and we got the results that we were expecting,
Mm.
or did not get the results we were expecting.
Yeah.
Either of the two
Yeah.
options.
Yeah. Okay.
No one's come up yet and shared that publicly. I'm the only one who's shared so far from what I can
Right.
see.
Okay.
You
All
know,
right. Well,
so
that probably speaks at a minimum. It speaks to transparency, but the fact that the numbers are good or the results are good speaks to the accuracy as well.
yeah, and look, it's one data point, right? So I'm not hanging my
Right.
hat on the one and saying, we have a trend here.
Right.
But until we start sharing and start learning from each other, that's the only way we'll know whether this approach of using synthetic information, can actually work.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so that's the other way I would use this moving forward is like help me understand our communication. Like, how does our communication work for our target, right?
yeah,
And it's interesting because our target, um, the prioritized target that we landed on out of that segmentation,
yeah,
I, they're hard to get time with. I mean, they're people who are in high demand, extremely busy,
yeah,
and being able to get them to just sit down with us to talk through communication approaches and things like that can
yeah,
be a challenge. So like I can see even just pragmatically,
yeah.
this approach could have some advantages we couldn't get otherwise.
You're right. In fact, I want to go back to 2024. When I was teaching at the University of South Carolina, I had a tire company come to my and give me a project for my MBA class,
Hmm.
where they were like, "Hey, we want to talk to fleet operations managers, for trucking companies, and we want to ask all these questions." Had
Hmm.
nothing to do with the tire, had everything to do with how they were running their operations and stuff like that. And my students were trying to basically go recruit respondents. They wanted to talk to 100 of them. They spoke to they got responses back from 10, which was nothing, right?
Right.
So they're freaking out, I'm freaking out, like the semester's almost over. So we said, okay, let's go down the synthetic data route and see if
Hmm.
we can actually go figure it out. And I told the client, and they were fine with it. my students actually built out the models and they were able to kind of like start answering the questions using synthetic respondents, basically
Mm.
that reflected large size, mid size, small size trucking companies. When they presented the results to the client, the client's reaction was kind of like, a tell. They said, "We knew you'd get in the ballpark, but what we did not expect was the specificity you came back with as results.
Yeah,
That
fascinating.
surprised us." You
Very
know,
cool. Yeah.
and so I feel like if you frame it the right way within these AI systems,
Hmm.
you can actually get to the specificity, but you have to know how to structure your guardrails and your prompts and things like that that can get you to that degree of specificity. It
Right.
can be done, but you just have to know how to do it, basically.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know. So,
Well done.
well, listen, we're up at time. Peter, I cannot thank you enough for you being so gracious with your time and coming on this podcast and sharing your experiences on the segmentation work that we did for you. Um, I would love to see how things progress with you with your business. That now that you're using it, maybe we
Yeah.
can re-engage sometime in the future, and you can tell us
There
what's
you
next
go.
with your business and what we can do to support you. So
I love it. I love it. Yeah, we'll do like a year one, year two, see how see how the business has developed against that strategic
great.
work. But thanks to you and the team at SIVO too for all the strategic partnership. That's been the most fun, and it's been a fun journey. We're excited about continuing down the path of what we found.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. I'll be posting the next podcast probably next week sometime, and would love to have you guys join us for that as well. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Yagesh.